to the Contract Podcast, part 2 of Doing the Right Things in the AI Era. I'm your host, Eva, and I'm here today with Amber and Tony. Tony, let's jump right in.
So if you think about the human qualities that are needed, and we've talked about these a little bit before when we've talked about folks finding the right fit in an organization. We've talked about this framework, if you will, when we've talked about AI, what it can and can't do. Can you guys think about some of the qualities that we always kind of harken back to almost in any discussion we have? Like what was missing in this case from a humanistic perspective that AI can't fill, of course, that could have made for such a better outcome.
I think very simply having moral courage
Mhm.
is one. So, speaking up when a decision is wrong, when an action is wrong, even at your own personal risk,
Yes.
that is a leadership trait to have leadership courage. And so we had manager one, manager two, both, and rather than saying, like, hey, I guess this has been maybe a practice rather than doing that and saying like this has been a practice, but we shouldn't be doing this. We need to do the right thing here. Just did the really quick thing and made the wrong decision.
You would think in this case, a no to two requests in an urgent situation probably made that person giving the no feel pretty bad. They should have kind of shaken themselves and said, "Did I make the right
Right.
decision?"
Right,
Even,
pretty
right?
bad, terrible.
Yeah,
Then that goes into the next quality, empathy.
right.
How would you want to be treated? How would you want your spouse to be treated? How would you want your daughter to be treated in a similar situation? So being able to see the full human and not just the request or the policy, um, and just being a good human and saying like this is a human being who needs help, who is asking for help. What can we do? Rather than a knee-jerk no response. And then psychological safety and creating a space where people can escalate without fear. And that is also like a cultural thing right there. So that is not on an individual human level, one person level, but it is a leadership quality also creating that safety. Because who creates psychological safety if it doesn't start with leadership? So having a space where people can escalate without fear. But that also applies to leaders. So there
Mhm.
are multiple levels of leaders. Maybe you have a leader who knows how things works around here,
That's true.
right? So they don't have the psychological safety to speak up. So I think those were some areas where they hadn't failed in those areas, they would have had a different outcome. Amber?
Yeah, and we've talked about it, but the ethical judgment, it's not about following the letter of the law or the letter of the policy when the spirit of the law or the spirit of the policy should actually take more precedence, right? So it's really asking what is the right thing to do versus well, what's allowed,
Right.
right? Or what's not going to
Yeah.
get
Right.
that
The law
that
is just what's
judgment.
what's going to keep you from getting into trouble.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
what should you do as a human?
Right. And then what was really a sad case that happens a lot of times is this paper shuffling pass in the buck.
Mhm.
So accountability,
Mhm.
who
Someone needed to own
owns
it.
it? Right.
Right.
Owning the outcome. So again, it goes back to the leaders,
Right.
right? Who owns it? The outcome, not just the process,
Mhm.
but when it goes wrong,
Who's
whose head
taking
is
that
on
ownership?
whose head is on the platter, right? Not just, well, we followed the process, right? And that really goes
Or
something
no one told me.
well, yeah. But
Yeah.
here's the basic thing above all else. We're talking about a person. What happened to human dignity, right? Just treating every person, particularly people in vulnerable situations, as worthy of care,
Mhm.
right? So that really that level of you said it, that empathy, but treating each person, no matter
Yeah.
where they are in the organization,
Yeah,
as worthy of care.
because we all are.
Period. Period.
We are. That's really good. Courage, empathy, judgment, accountability, psychological safety, dignity. All those are important, but let's be real. A lot of folks have a lot of stuff going on. and to really use all of those human weapons which make us most powerful as leaders and people who want to do a good job for ourselves and for our companies. How do you apply those though within a framework where you've got all kind of scheduling requests, you've got performance reviews to write, you've got meetings to go to? How do you do this when you've also got data coming at you? You've got an AI backdrop to worry about. How do you get all of it done and still be a human?
Um, I have a very simple response to that. I think you just need qualified, and I will emphasize qualified because everyone who has an HR title does not necessarily mean that they are a qualified HR professional.
That's a real good comment because in this context, there, as you mentioned, like, Eva, there was a toolkit of legal and
Hmm.
policy things that probably got bypassed.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
would think.
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you, having that qualified, seasoned HR ethics professional who's going to ensure that humanness isn't lost in the process. It's really simple. That person knows what to look out for
Right.
from a legal perspective, but also best practices for leadership development and those qualities that are needed, right? So you have that person, that group, what have you in place to have some oversight over what's being produced, some review. If they say, "Hey, you can't do that," then have a conversation about why not, and make sure that you understand. But having that seasoned HR ethics professional would do a lot of organizations a world of good.
That's a really good perspective from an individual, what the individual HR person can do. But what about the company's responsibility? Or if you kind of look at this on a more macro level, what should employers be thinking about?
Well, when you think about systems,
Mhm.
Eva, you touched on it, the checkpoints. Where are the checkpoints in the system, right? Every process, when you think about the diagrams that like the decision trees and all that type of thing, there's always a checkpoint, right? To make sure before you say move to step B from
Mm-hmm.
A, was it
Do
yes or
this.
no?
That's right.
There's a path, right?
Mhm.
So even if you're in a situation where you have processes, even if it's AI assisted process, what are those human checkpoints that can put that empathetic lens on, that seasoned judgment lens
Mhm.
onto it? Uh, Also, this empathy, seasoned judgment, these are things that are not just compliance. There has to be some training. We have to make sure that your leaders, because it goes back to leadership,
Mhm.
really setting the stage, creating that culture, they need to be trained on and held accountable to
Mm-hmm.
fulfilling or living up to what the expectations are. And these quote unquote soft skills, which are really the non-negotiables, because at the end of the day, unless
Mm.
your entire workforce are computers, you're dealing with
Mm-hmm.
human beings. So how do you care for the human beings? And audit those impossible choices. We are human and we make mistakes. It shouldn't be a pattern of making mistakes, but are you taking into account when something has happened? What do you learn from this? Are you documenting that and then
Mhm.
putting that back out into the organization so that everyone is learning? As a leader, I know what to do next time. As an individual, I know what should be happening or what
Mm-hmm.
recourse I have available to me for next time. And this is something that's so important to me. You talked about psychological safety,
Mm-hmm.
Eva. I am a firm believer, and this goes back to my education days, that what is measured is what gets done,
Exactly.
right? Make psychological safety a measurable outcome on the scorecard
Mm-hmm.
of the leader. If you start messing with my money because I'm not doing something, guess what? I'm going to start doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm going to pay attention to it. I'm going to make sure that I understand what this means so that I'm hitting. Now, hopefully, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do and I want to do the right thing. But at the very bare minimum, if these things that I want you to do, these behavioral traits need to be present, they need to be on a scorecard.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, that's how we're managing to identify where those breakdowns are. We can manage up or manage out.
Well, that's a great point. Money talks, and so If you start hitting leaderships, I did say that. If you start hitting leadership where it matters, I won't say most, but greatly, which is their money, right? Start hitting their bonuses, their raises, things like that. Then you'll start to see some change. If there is a need for change in that individual, and even the organization. I would say, like the board of directors, if you've got a CEO issue, but if you have a culture that's not supporting these things, you got to come up with something to fix it. You know, I'm sure there are other organizations. It's not just this one company that we talked about. I know that there are others. You could Google it and find out.
This was such a tragic case. I think
Yeah.
we all agree.
Yeah.
This is really bad.
All right. So, we can talk about mindsets, skill sets, tool sets all day, but Magnolia Walsh's story reminds us that none of it matters if the people in the building have forgotten that the person making the request is a human being first. They've forgotten that, all is lost. And that's not soft. That's not a nice to have. That is the foundation, and that it always will be, that human is.
And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today on the Contract Podcast. You can find out more about the Contract Podcast on the website, thecontractpodcast.com, or the_contract_podcast on Instagram. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.